والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين وعلى الصفوة الأخيار من صحابته المنتجبين ومن تبعهم بإحسان وإيمان إلى يوم الدين. My dear brothers and sisters, may the peace and the blessings of Allah be upon you and with you all the times. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. One of the important concepts in the tradition of Shi'a Islam is the concept of infallibility and sinlessness, meaning that all the messengers of God and the 14 infallibles, the 12 Imams, Prophet Muhammad and his 12 successors, and Lady Fatima al-Zahra, peace be upon all of them, are infallible. They do not commit a sin. They never committed a sin during their lifetime, a sin that earns the anger of God. And the clearest way to understand this and to fathom this concept of infallibility is to believe that those leaders were not only conveyors of God's message to the humanity. They are not just taking the book and the revelation from one place into another. They are also role models. They are the first people to implement the teachings of these revelations and these books. So they have to be perfect in order for the people to believe in them and to accept them and endorse them and follow them. Those leaders, those messengers and imams have to be infallible, have to be perfect. If an imam, if a messenger commits a gross violation of God's rules, then it would be hard for people around him to believe in what he is saying. Even it would be harder for them to follow him and to accept him. Therefore, they have to be perfect. But how does this infallibility work? Does infallibility mean that they cannot commit a sin, or actually practically they can commit a sin? They have a free will, but they abstain from it through their own self-control and a free will. In fact, it is the second. It means that a prophet, a messenger, an imam, or Lady Fatima al-Zahra, peace be upon all of them, they have the power, they have the choice, they have the ability of committing any sin, but they don't do that. They stay away from it. Through their own free will, they stay away from it. Because of their love to God, because of their connection, super connection with God, because of their relationship with God, this relationship is so strong that does not allow them to think about committing a sin, let alone doing it or practicing it. Therefore, they stay away from it. And because they stay away from it, God would provide them with extra layer of protection. So infallibility, isma, has two branches. One is embedded in the person himself, is embedded in the prophet and the imam through his own free will. He does not want to think about sin because he has something much better than that. He can see the glory of God. He can see the beauty of God. He can see the nearness of God. And this is exactly what is mentioned in the Quran. By the way, infallibility has been mentioned in the Quran, the term Ya'sim or Isma, 13 times. throughout the Holy Book. And therefore, in the story of Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, لولا أن رأى برهان ربه وهمت به وهم بها. This is a very clear-cut evidence. وهمت به. She desired him and she attempted to get him. وهم بها لولا أن رأى برهان ربه. He almost did it. But because he did not do that, because he saw the glory of his Lord. He saw the beauty of his Lord. If it wasn't for that glory, for that beauty, for that relationship that he enjoyed with his Lord, that special connection that Joseph had with his Lord, he would have done it. He would have been an ordinary person. And therefore he would have done that because he was in a very, very, very tough and difficult situation. But because برهان ربه لولا أن رأى برهان ربه, the beauty, the light, the glory of the Lord overwhelmed his heart. So he wouldn't have thought of going even close to committing a sin. He did not commit a sin. He didn't even think of committing it. So it is, number one, the first branch, it's about personal choice. They have personal choice, but also they have something called self-control and self-restraint. The second part of infallibility, when Allah finds that they have a strong will, strong self-control, He would provide them and bestow on them and honor them with an extra layer of protection, and that extra layer of protection is the special grace from the Lord upon them to strengthen their self-control, to deepen their self-control, to bring more immunity and more protection to their self-control. Therefore, it has two branches. One, the person himself, he's ready for it, he's prepared for it. The second part is what God bestows on him as an extra protection, and this is what is called the concept of infallibility or isma. So infallibility means literally protection. And in Islamic terminology, it means the special spiritual grace provided by God, given by God to specific people who are worthy of receiving it and maintaining it and cherishing it, enabling them to abstain from committing a sin, but through their own free will. So they are not incapable of committing a sin. Practically, they are able. They can go any minute and commit a sin, but they choose to abstain, stay away from it, for the larger good, for something which is much better than that small sin, because they have so much wisdom and for farsightedness and understanding that they would not forego this larger goodness that they have. They would not endanger this special enjoyment and happiness and connection that they are having with their Lord for the sake of committing a sin. They would not do that. So it is through their own free will they abstain from it. This is the concept of isma. Now, why isma is important? Many people say, I cannot believe that a prophet is really infallible. He's a human being. He has desires. And sometimes he can be overcome with his own desires. I cannot believe such and such person is infallible. Infallibility is a logical concept. Because God intends guidance for the humanity. الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى. When God creates, He wants to guide at the same time. He would not leave people in disarray, in confusion. He wants them to be guided. And in order for Him to guide the people, He would send the best people and the best examples and the best role models for them to inspire the people. The book itself is not enough. You need someone who's able to implement this book. You need someone to see him, to learn from him. And that person is the messenger. And that person is the imam. And that lady is Fatima al-Zahra, peace be upon her. And of course, those role models, they play a major role in our life. They are examples. We learn from them. Therefore, they have to be able to provide the safest and the healthiest example. So if they choose to commit a sin, then their example would not be good. It would be corrupt. And actually, not only it would be corrupt, it's going to be also an inspiration for us, a negative inspiration to do exactly the same. For instance, in the story of Abasa wa Tawalla, Prophet Muhammad, in other traditions, the tradition of the companions of the Prophet, they believe that Abasa is meant the Prophet who frowned and he turned away. Now, if the Prophet frowns, the Prophet that God describes him as وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, you are nothing but compassion and mercy and forgiveness. وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, you stand on the highest level of ethical standards. You are the role model. You are a saint. You are very purified, very exalted in your ethics, in your manners, in your behavior. Now, if he frowns to someone who's coming to ask him a question, don't you think this is a negative message sent to us? And then I, in my capacity, and you yourself, in your own capacity, we're going to do the same. So we say it's impossible that it was the Prophet. It was someone else from Bani Umayyah who was sitting next to the Prophet. He was the one who frowned when that man came trying to ask, who was blind, and he came and he tried to ask the Prophet a question. The Prophet did not frown because it would contradict this behavior. This unpleasant behavior is going to contradict his message and his spirit. We learn from him. We look at the Prophet and we learn from him. And the sunnah, the meaning of sunnatun nabi, means his tradition and his behavior. We look at what he does, we do exactly the same. So if he frowns to someone who's a good believer, a good mu'min coming to ask him a question, then we could learn the same thing from him. And this is very dangerous and this is very counterproductive to the Islamic message. Therefore, the Prophet did not do that. Through logic, we understand that the Prophet did not do that. First, through logic. It's a common sense. And then the Quran tells us, for instance, in chapter 15, verse 42, إِنَّ عِبَادِي لَيْسَ لَكَ عَلَيْهِمْ سُلْطَانٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Satan and he tells him, certainly, O Satan, certainly you shall have no authority over my servants except those who follow you and go astray. There are certain people that you cannot have authority over them. They are protected. Protected through what? Isma, infallibility. Even if you try hard and hard and hard, but you cannot knock them down. You have no authority on them. You cannot reach to them actually. You cannot breach this fence, security fence, spiritual and moral security fence that they have around them. You cannot, even if you work hard. You're going to fail. إِنَّ عِبَادِي لَيْسَ لَكَ عَلَيْهِمْ سُلْطَانٌ. Therefore, you can reach to others who are weak-spirited. You can deceive them. You can mislead them. And you know, Satan tried. He even tried with the prophets, with messengers. He tried to reach out to them. He tried to deceive them. But he failed. Why he failed? Because they were ma'soom. While when he came to other ordinary people, he was able to completely knock them down. Because they did not have that layer of a protection. Not that God did not want to bestow on them. They were not worthy of receiving it and cherishing it and maintaining it. There are verses in the Holy Quran that imply that some of the messengers and the prophets of God committed sins. But these verses are not to be taken literally. The sin in these verses, such as, for instance, regarding Moses or regarding Jonah, وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَن لَّن نَّقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَن لَّا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ. Or regarding Moses, وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. Or even when it comes to Adam and Eve, وَعَصَى آدَمُ رَبَّهُ فَغَوَى. These terms of sinning are not to be taken literal. Because in the case, let's say the case of Adam and Eve. In the case of Adam, although the Quran says disobedience, but that disobedience was not to the command of God, not to the obligations and the mandatory commands of God. It was to the advisory commands. We have to differentiate between the two. If someone violates the mandatory commands, yes, that's a sin. That's a violation. But if someone wants to violate the advisory commands, this is not considered a sin with the literal meaning of sin. So why then God criticize him? And he says, وَعَصَى آدَمَ وَلَقَدْ عَهِدْنَا إِلَىٰ آدَمَ مِنْ قَبْلِ فَنَسِيَ وَلَمْ نَجِدْ لَهُ عَزْمًا. We conveyed to him, we asked him to do certain things, he forgot. And we did not find on his side azm or willpower. So he did not have willpower and he violated the advisory commands of God, not the mandatory one. What does that mean? It means that someone like Adam, the first man, the first prophet, the first caliph on earth, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. He was supposed to really be able to have greater free will, greater azm. But unfortunately, because of his nature, and God wants to show us that even Adam has a human nature, so he could be deceived. He could be approached by the Quran. He could be approached by Satan and he could be deceived by Satan, but he did not commit a sin. All what he did is that God said to him, don't approach the tree. And if you approach it, then you have to leave heaven. So he lost his privileges in heaven. So he did not commit a sin with the literal meaning of sinning. When we come to Moses, وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَنْ يَقْتُلُونَ, it's the same. Because in the argument between one of his tribesmen and the one from the Pharaoh's side, when that man asked him for help, his tribesman, Moses, all what he did, he pushed that man. And that man happened to be weak. So he fell down and he died instantly. It was not the attention of Moses to kill that man. But in the eyes of Pharaoh and his company, Moses became guilty. He became a criminal. So they were searching him to capture him. And Moses ran away because if they capture him, he will be captive there and he cannot fulfill his mission. So he ran away. So in the eyes of the Pharaoh and the Coptic, he was a criminal. But in the eyes of God, he was not a criminal. He did not intend, he did not do this action with intention. It was not a premeditated action of killing or murder. It was a mistake. And the story of Jonah, وَذَنُّونِ إِذْ ذَهَبَ مُغَاضِبًا فَظَنَّ أَن لَّن نَّقْدِرَ عَلَيْهِ. Jonah left his community of Nineveh in anger. And he thought and he imagined that we are not going to contain him. Where did he end up? فَنَادَى فِي الظُّلُمَاتِ أَن لَّا إِلَهَ إِلَّا أَنْتَ سُبْحَانَكَ إِنِّي كُنْتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. In the bottom of the darkness, he cried, "Glory to you. There is no Lord but you. Indeed, I have inflicted wrongdoing on myself." إِنِّي كُنْتُ مِنَ الظَّالِمِينَ. He wronged himself, not that he committed a sin. In his capacity as a leader, he should have patience, tolerance, and he should have stayed in his community. He shouldn't have left them. But unfortunately, he forgot. He left them. So he did not commit a literal sin or them. The same thing about Prophet Muhammad in the Quran. لِيَغْفِرَ لَكَ اللَّهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِن ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. These are metaphoric and allegorical terms. Does not mean that the Prophet committed a sin. The Prophet has been perceived by Quraysh. In the eyes of Quraysh, he was a sinner. سَفَّهَ آلِهَتَنَا أَفْسَدَ شَبَابَنَا. He came, desecrated our idols. He brainwashed our youth. So in the eyes of Quraysh in Mecca, the Prophet was a criminal. But in the eyes of God, he was the sweetheart of God. He was doing exactly what God asked him to do. He was not committing a sin. So after the conquest of Mecca, Allah is telling him now, today, لِيَغْفِرَ لَكَ اللَّهُ إِنَّا فَتَحْنَا لَكَ فَتْحًا مُبِينًا. We have allowed you to achieve a big victory and a triumph over Quraysh. And لِيَغْفِرَ لَكَ اللَّهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِن ذَنْبِكَ. How did that happen? When Quraysh saw the Prophet very forgiving, although he was able to put the sword and eliminate his enemies, eradicate his entire enemies in Mecca. But he did not do that. They said to him, أَخٌ كَرِيمٌ وَابْنُ أَخٍ كَرِيمٌ. You are an honorable brother and you are the son of an honorable brother. He turned to them and he said, اذهبوا فأنتم الطلقاء. I will set you free. I will not press charges against you. I would not retaliate. I would not, kill any person here on this day in Mecca, in this land, in this sacred place. He set them free despite their horrendous persecutions. One of them was Abu Sufyan and others. Their persecution of the Muslims and the killing that they inflicted against the Muslims. But the Prophet decided to forgive them. So in the eyes of Quraysh, he became clean with a clean record. And this is what God means. لِيَغْفِرَ لَكَ اللَّهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِن ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. In the eyes of Quraysh, you were a sinner. Nowadays, your record has been cleared. This is in a brief the concept of infallibility and asma in Shi'a Islam.